The basement is actually quite suitable. Those 5 words would haunt me for months to come. They hung in the air of that Aurora, Colorado kitchen like a death sentence, spoken with a casual cruelty that only family can deliver. Angela, my daughter-in-law, said them while stacking dishes with deliberate precision, never bothering to look up from her task. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting long shadows that seemed to point toward the basement door like an omen of what was to come. But what Angela didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was far from finished. This is my story of how I discovered just how strong I really was. Welcome back to Granny Dorothy's Stories. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Your support truly encourages me to continue sharing these incredible tales with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from my sweethearts around the world. 3 months before that terrible moment in the kitchen, I stood in a black dress at Riverside Cemetery, watching my husband Robert's casket being lowered into the ground. At 59 years old, I was burying the man who had been my anchor for 32 years. The love letters in my purse, the ones I'd found just that morning while packing his clothes, were still damp with my tears. Robert had written to me one every week during his military deployment when Jason was just a toddler, promising he'd come home to build the life we'd dreamed of together. And we had built that life. I had worked as a teacher for 30 years, shaping young minds while raising Jason as essentially a single mother during those long months when Robert was overseas. I remembered the sleepless nights, rocking Jason to sleep while humming the same lullaby my own mother had sung to me. I remembered teaching him to ride his bike in our driveway, cheering at his high school graduation, working extra shifts to help pay for his college education. Every sacrifice had been worth it because we were building something beautiful. A family, a home, a legacy of love. But now, standing at that graveside, I felt completely lost. My hands shook as I twisted my wedding ring, a habit I'd developed over 3 decades of marriage. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love now felt like a mausoleum. Every corner held memories that seemed to mock my newfound solitude. That's when Jason approached me with what seemed like genuine concern. My son, my baby boy who was now 35 years old, wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "Mom, you can't stay in that big house alone. It's too much for you now." His voice carried the same tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something, but I was too grief-stricken to notice. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I admitted, my vulnerability laid bare for the first time since Robert's diagnosis. I was the woman who had held our family together through deployments, job losses, and Robert's 2-year battle with cancer. But now I felt like I was drowning. Jason's solution seemed like a lifeline. His house was modern, spacious, beautifully furnished, everything that spoke of success and stability. When he said, "Come stay with us, Mom. We have plenty of room," I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. My son was taking care of me in my darkest hour. But when we arrived at the house, Angela met us at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Caitlin, I hope you don't mind," she said with practiced sweetness. "But we had to convert the guest room into an art studio for the kids. You know how it is." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the blow. "The basement is actually quite suitable though. You'll have your own space down there." I looked at Jason, hoping for some pushback, some defense of his grieving mother's dignity. But Jason just nodded along, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, Mom, it'll work out fine. The basement has everything you need." His agreement felt like a second betrayal, confirming that this humiliation had been planned all along. Angela was 35, blonde, and Instagram perfect. She had married Jason not for love, but for the inheritance prospects she'd calculated in her head. She knew about Robert's military pension, knew about the house that would one day be Jason's, knew about the savings account that I had built through decades of careful budgeting. What Angela didn't know was that she was about to show her true colors in the most spectacular way possible. The basement wasn't just unfinished. It was a forgotten storage space that smelled of concrete and old wood, with undertones of dampness that would have failed any habitability inspection. The spacious room was roughly 10 by 12 feet, dominated by a water heater and furnace that hummed and clicked like mechanical sentries. A narrow single bed sat pushed against one wall, covered with a thin floral bedspread that had seen better decades. The mini-fridge hummed loudly in the corner, and the little bathroom was actually a powder room clearly designed for storage, not human habitation. Angela flipped on the single overhead bulb that hung from a cord, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. "See," she said brightly, as if she were showing off a luxury suite. "Everything you need." What I needed was dignity, safety, and respect. What I had was a basement with one small window near the ceiling that let in approximately 2 hours of natural light per day. I counted 7 main pipes running across the low ceiling, with various smaller connections that became landmarks in my new geography of exile. "Thank you," I said quietly, because 32 years of marriage and 30 years of teaching had taught me when to conserve my energy for battles that actually mattered. That first night, I lay on the narrow mattress listening to the mechanical symphony of home systems and the muffled sounds of life continuing above me. Footsteps crossed the kitchen. The television provided background noise for family conversations I could no longer join. I could hear Jason and Angela's voices through the thin ceiling, discussing their day while I stared at exposed pipes and tried to make sense of how quickly my life had changed. By midnight, I understood that this arrangement wasn't about my recovery from grief. It was about their convenience. The pattern emerged over the following days with brutal clarity. Angela established rules with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real hardship. The kitchen was off limits except for brief visits to grab basic necessities. "This isn't a hotel, Caitlin," Angela announced one morning, blocking the kitchen entrance. "You have your little space downstairs. There's no need for you to be coming up here and disrupting our routine." Night after night, I heated simple meals on the hot plate while laughter echoed from the dining room above. I could smell the aroma of elaborate dinners I wasn't invited to share. When I scrolled through Jason's Instagram posts, I saw photo after photo of their family dinners. Beautifully plated meals, candlelit tables, Angela and Jason toasting their happiness. But there was no place set for the woman who had raised him, no acknowledgement that I even existed in their perfect life. The isolation was suffocating. I found myself talking to Robert's photograph, the one I'd managed to save from the few possessions I'd brought with me. I'd whisper apologies for not being stronger, for not knowing how to navigate this new world without him. I'd pull out my phone and watch old home videos. Jason's birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations where he would hug me tight and tell me I was the best mom in the world. Where had that loving son gone? When had his embrace turned into exile? The real knife to my heart came when I found Robert's military photograph in Jason's trash. It was the picture that had sat on our mantelpiece for 15 years. Robert in his dress uniform, smiling the smile that had captured my heart when I was just 27 years old. I'd given that photo to Jason when he'd moved into his new house, thinking he'd want to honor his father's memory. Instead, I found it crumpled between coffee grounds and leftover takeout containers. That night, as I sat in the basement holding that rescued photograph, I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. Angela's voice carried clearly through the heating vent as she talked to what sounded like a friend. "She's too comfortable down there," Angela was saying, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "We need to make this less appealing. Maybe then she'll start looking into one of those senior living places and stop being our problem." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't temporary kindness. This was a calculated plan to make me so miserable that I'd remove myself from their lives entirely. I thought about the assisted living brochures that had mysteriously appeared on the small table beside my makeshift bed. I thought about Jason's increasingly distant behavior. His refusal to discuss any timeline for me moving out or finding a place of my own. As the weeks passed, I began to notice things that didn't add up. There were always papers scattered around Jason's home office, documents with official letterheads that seemed important. My teacher's instincts kicked in despite my emotional state. After 3 decades of spotting when students weren't telling the whole truth, I recognized the signs that something wasn't right. Something about the timing of Robert's death, Jason's sudden generosity, and the insistence that I couldn't manage on my own. Something about the way they discussed my future without including me in the conversation. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end shattered what was left of my world. "Mrs. Johnson. This is Tom Bradley from Riverside Realty. I wanted to confirm the closing date for the Johnson property on Oak Street. The buyers are eager to finalize the sale." The world stopped. Oak Street was where Robert and I had lived for 25 years. Oak Street was home. Oak Street was supposed to be mine. And apparently, Oak Street had been sold without my knowledge or consent. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was working against you behind your back? Have you ever felt that sinking realization that the people who claimed to love you were actually planning your downfall? Drop a comment below and share your experience, because what I discovered next will shock you to your core. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, how I went from a basement prisoner to the one holding all the power, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, my revenge is going to be absolutely perfect. The phone call from the real estate agent shattered my world. But what happened next would destroy what little trust one had left in the son I'd raised with such love and sacrifice. When I confronted Jason about the sale of my house, the house where I'd taught him to ride his bike, where I'd nursed him through childhood illnesses, where I'd celebrated every milestone of his life, his response was cold, calculated, and devastating. "You couldn't maintain it anyway, Mom," Jason said with the casual dismissiveness of someone discussing a broken appliance. "The property taxes were eating us alive. I was doing you a favor." His words hit me like physical blows. Eating us alive. Since when has my house become their financial burden? Since when did my 30 years of careful mortgage payments become their problem to solve? But the real knife came when I discovered where the money had gone. Jason had used the proceeds from selling my home, my sanctuary, my memories, my security, to buy himself a brand new SUV and pay off Angela's credit card debts. The woman who had banned me from the kitchen upstairs was now driving around town in a car paid for by the sale of my dreams. Every room in that house held memories that Jason had literally sold for his convenience. The kitchen where I'd taught him to cook his first meal. The living room where we'd watched movies together during his teenage years. The garden where Robert had proposed on a spring morning 32 years ago. All of it gone, liquidated, turned into monthly car payments and shopping sprees. I found myself reliving those memories in the cold basement, staring at that single harsh light bulb and wondering how the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd driven to soccer practice, the teenager I'd stayed up with during homework struggles, had become capable of such calculated cruelty. As the days passed, the humiliation deepened with surgical precision. Angela decided to host a dinner party, an elegant affair with her book club friends, complete with wine pairings and sophisticated conversation. The basement door remained firmly closed as I listened to the laughter and clinking glasses above my head. When one guest asked, "Where's your mother-in-law? I'd love to meet her," Angela's response cut through the floor like acid. "Oh, she's fine," Angela said with practiced casualness. "She's downstairs in her little place. She prefers privacy, you know how elderly people can be." I sat on my narrow bed, eating cereal from a plastic bowl while elegant silverware clinked against fine china just 15 feet above my head. The contrast was intentional, designed to remind me of my place in this new hierarchy. I wasn't family anymore. I was a basement dweller who preferred privacy, because acknowledging my presence would complicate Angela's perfect hostess narrative. The isolation wasn't just physical. It was social, emotional, and psychological. Jason's Instagram account became a constant source of pain as I scrolled through photo after photo of their family life. Beautiful dinners where my absence was so complete it was as if I'd never existed. Vacation plans made without consultation. Holiday preparations that didn't include the woman who had created every family tradition they were now enjoying without me. But Angela wasn't content with mere exile. She needed to ensure that my position was not just uncomfortable, but untenable. The comments began like drops of poison, delivered with the sweet smile that had fooled me initially. "I noticed you left your coffee cup upstairs again, Caitlin. Remember, the kitchen is really for family meal preparation. It's better if you stick to your space downstairs. Then came the rules, delivered with the authority of someone who had clearly thought through every detail of this psychological warfare. No using the upstairs bathroom during the day. It might disturb Angela's work-from-home routine. No receiving mail at the house. It cluttered the entryway. No having visitors. The basement entrance was too disruptive to family life. Each restriction was presented as a reasonable accommodation, a small adjustment for the good of everyone. But I recognized the pattern from my teaching days. This was systematic isolation, designed to make me feel like a burden, an inconvenience, a problem that needed solving rather than a person who deserved respect. The breaking point came when I found Jason's college graduation photo in the trash. The same photo I'd paid to have professionally framed, the image that captured the pride in his eyes as he held his diploma, the moment that had justified every sacrifice I'd made to pay his tuition. Seeing it crumpled between coffee grounds and takeout containers wasn't just disrespectful. It was a deliberate erasure of our shared history. That night, as I carefully cleaned coffee stains from the glass and straightened the bent frame, I heard voices through the heating vent that would change everything. Angela was on the phone with someone. Her voice carrying the casual cruelty that comes from believing you're unobserved. "The thing is, she's getting too comfortable down there," Angela was saying, her tone as matter-of-fact as if she were discussing redecorating choices. "We need to make this situation less appealing. Maybe start talking about assisted living options, you know? She needs to understand that this arrangement isn't working long-term." The calculated nature of the conversation was breathtaking. Angela wasn't expressing frustration or concern. She was strategizing my removal with the efficiency of a corporate reorganization. This wasn't about space or convenience. It was about clearing the way for a lifestyle that didn't include inconvenient elderly relatives. But the conversation that followed was even worse. Jason's voice joined Angela's, and his words revealed the depth of betrayal that I had only begun to understand. "The lawyer said we need documented incidents of confusion or memory problems," Jason said, his voice carrying none of the warmth I remembered from our phone calls just months earlier. Yesterday, when she asked about Dad's glasses, I wrote it down as potential cognitive decline. We need at least 3 documented episodes before we can petition for guardianship. My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to make me miserable enough to leave. They were building a legal case to take control of my life entirely. The question about Robert's reading glasses hadn't been confusion. It had been grief, habit, the kind of muscle memory that comes from 32 years of marriage. But they were documenting it as evidence of mental incompetence. "Once we have guardianship," Angela continued, "we can move her into that place on Colfax. It's cheap, and then we could use her remaining assets to pay off our mortgage completely. Maybe even buy that rental property we looked at." My remaining assets. They were discussing my life savings, my social security, my veteran's widow benefits. Everything Robert had worked for, everything I'd carefully preserved, as if it were already theirs to manage. They had sold my house, exiled me to a basement, and now they were planning to institutionalize me so they could legally steal what was left of my independence. The cruelest part was the clinical efficiency of their planning. This wasn't emotional or impulsive. It was calculated, systematic, and designed to appear legitimate to outside observers. Who would question a son's concern for his elderly mother's well-being? Who would challenge a family's decision to seek legal authority over a confused widow's finances? But they had made one critical error in their scheming. They had forgotten that I had spent 30 years teaching high school students how to think critically, analyze evidence, and document their observations with scientific precision. They had forgotten that I'd raised a generation of young people to question authority, challenge assumptions, and never accept explanations that didn't match the evidence. Most importantly, they had forgotten that grief and vulnerability are not the same as stupidity. The next morning, while Jason and Angela followed their usual routine of leaving for work without so much as acknowledging my presence, I began my own investigation. I started paying attention to the papers scattered around Jason's home office, the documents with official letterheads that seemed to multiply daily. Insurance policies, financial statements, legal consultations. all focused on the management of assets that weren't yet legally theirs to manage. I noticed the timing of everything with the analytical mind that had once tracked chemical reactions and graded thousands of lab reports. Robert's death, Jason's immediate insistence that I couldn't live alone, the sudden urgency to sell my house, the basement arrangement that kept me isolated and dependent, it all followed a pattern that would have been obvious to anyone not blinded by grief and trust. But the discovery that changed everything came when I was cleaning around the furnace, trying to create some semblance of order in my cramped living space. Tucked behind a stack of old storage boxes, I found a manila folder that had clearly been forgotten in Jason's haste to hide his planning documents. Inside were copies of emails between Jason and a probate attorney, discussing strategies for establishing guardianship over elderly relatives with diminished capacity. There were printouts of real estate listings for assisted living facilities, with handwritten notes about costs and payment options. Most devastating of all, there was a timeline, a month-by-month plan for transitioning me from independent widow to legally dependent ward. The timeline was breathtakingly thorough. Month 1. Establish dependency by moving me into their home. Month 2. Document incidents of confusion and poor judgment. Month 3. Begin guardianship proceedings. Month 4. Transfer financial assets. Month 5. Place in assisted living facility. Month 6. Sell remaining property and consolidate assets. They had planned my entire future without consulting me, treating me like a problem to be solved rather than a person with rights, preferences, and the legal capacity to make my own decisions. The basement wasn't temporary housing. It was a holding facility, designed to keep me isolated and controllable while they systematically dismantled my independence. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten note in Angela's distinctive cursive. Accident possibilities. Basement stairs unsafe. Poor lighting, loose handrail. Natural progression if other methods are unsuccessful. I read that note 3 times before its full meaning sank in. They weren't just planning to steal my assets and institutionalize me. They had considered scenarios where my death would be the most convenient solution to their financial problems. The basement stairs that I navigated carefully each day weren't just poorly maintained. They were potentially weapons in a plan that treated my life as expendable. The rage that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't the hot anger of immediate betrayal. This was the cold, focused fury of someone who finally understood the full scope of the conspiracy against me. They had taken my home, my dignity, my family relationships, and now they were planning to take my freedom, my assets, and possibly my life. But rage, I had learned during 40 years of dealing with difficult situations, was only useful if it could be channeled into effective action. And thanks to 30 years of teaching young people to research, document, and present evidence systematically, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved was capable of planning your destruction with such calculated precision? Have you ever realized that the people who claimed to care about you were actually viewing you as an obstacle to their financial goals? Share your thoughts in the comments, because what I did next will show these manipulators exactly who they were dealing with. If you're invested in seeing how I fought back against the family that betrayed me, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, my revenge is going to be absolutely devastating, and you won't want to miss a single moment of my comeback. The manila folder containing their conspiracy plans became my blueprint for war. But unlike Jason and Angela, who had underestimated their opponent, I understood that victory required patience, precision, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from decades of outmaneuvering difficult people. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a retired educator who had spent 30 years teaching teenagers to research thoroughly, document meticulously, and never make claims they couldn't support with evidence. The first step was information gathering, and I approached it with the same systematic methodology I'd once used to design chemistry experiments. Every morning, after Jason and Angela left for work, I emerged from the basement with the careful movements of someone conducting surveillance. I photographed every document in Jason's office, using the smartphone that Robert had insisted I learn to use before his death. Each photo was labeled, dated, and stored with military precision. What I discovered made my blood boil but also gave me hope. Jason and Angela were sloppy conspirators. Their arrogance had made them careless, and their assumption that I was helpless had made them leave evidence scattered everywhere like breadcrumbs leading to their own destruction. The house deed was the first revelation that changed everything. Hidden among Jason's financial papers, I found the original property documents that revealed a truth my son had apparently forgotten. The Aurora house wasn't in Jason's name alone. When Robert died, his share of the property had automatically transferred to me through our joint ownership agreement. I wasn't living in Jason's house as a dependent. I was legally a 50% owner of the property where they had exiled me to the basement. The irony was breathtaking. They had been treating me like a charity case while I actually owned half of everything around me. The beautiful kitchen where Angela had banned my presence, 50% mine. The elegant dining room where I'd been excluded from family dinners, 50% mine. Even the basement where they'd imprisoned me was, legally speaking, my own property. But property ownership was just the beginning of what I discovered about my legal position. The financial documents scattered through Jason's office revealed that my son had been far more reckless with money than I'd ever imagined. Credit card debts, missed mortgage payments, and a second mortgage taken out without my knowledge, using my half of the property as collateral. Jason hadn't just sold my house to buy a car. He'd been desperately trying to cover debts that threatened his own financial survival. The guardianship plan wasn't just about convenience. It was about accessing my savings, my veterans' benefits, and my social security to cover his irresponsible spending. They needed my money to maintain the lifestyle they'd been living beyond their means. Armed with this knowledge, I began making phone calls. But unlike Jason's conversations about guardianship proceedings, my calls were strategic, purposeful, and designed to build a network of support rather than a conspiracy of exploitation. The first call went to Linda Martinez, an attorney who had been one of my most promising students 15 years earlier. Linda specialized in elder law, and when I explained my situation, the response was immediate and fierce. "Mrs. Johnson, what you're describing is textbook elder abuse and financial exploitation," Linda said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had handled hundreds of similar cases. "The fact that they're planning guardianship proceedings without your knowledge, combined with the property issues, gives us multiple angles for legal action. But first, we need to get you out of that basement and into a safe environment." "I'm not ready to leave yet," I replied, surprising both Linda and myself with the steel in my voice. "I want to document everything they're planning. I want evidence that will protect other elderly people from facing what I've endured." Linda was quiet for a moment before responding. "You're talking about building a criminal case, not just protecting yourself. Are you prepared for what that involves?" "I spent 30 years teaching young people to stand up to bullies," I said. "It's time I practiced what I preached." The next call went to Detective Sarah Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit, who remembered me from the community education programs I'd taught for the police department. Sarah's response to my evidence was immediate and professional. "Mrs. Johnson, based on what you're describing, we're looking at potential charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and possibly attempted guardianship fraud. If you're willing to wear a recording device and document their conversations, we can build a case that will not only protect you but potentially help other victims." A recording device. I felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. It's smaller than a hearing aid and virtually undetectable. Given what you've told me about their planning timeline, we probably have a few weeks before they move forward with guardianship proceedings. That gives us time to gather evidence that will demolish their case and potentially put them in prison. But the most important call was to Judge Patricia Mullins, now retired, who had worked with me on several community initiatives over the years. Judge Mullins listened to my entire story without interruption, and when I finished, the response was both comforting and terrifying. "Caitlin, what you're describing represents everything wrong with our elder care system," Judge Mullins said. "Families who view elderly relatives as financial opportunities rather than people deserving respect. The fact that they're using guardianship proceedings as a weapon makes this particularly serious. I still have connections on the bench who need to hear about this case." Within 48 hours, I had assembled a response team that would have impressed any crisis management consultant. Legal representation, law enforcement support, judicial oversight, and financial protection services. More importantly, I had validation that my situation wasn't normal family caregiving. It was systematic abuse that violated both moral standards and criminal law. But building a legal case was only half of my strategy. The other half involved something far more personal and devastating, letting Jason and Angela reveal the full extent of their cruelty while I documented every moment. The recording device Detective Rodriguez provided was indeed smaller than a hearing aid, virtually invisible once positioned. For the first time since moving into the basement, I felt like I had power. Not just the ability to gather evidence, but the satisfaction of knowing that every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of calculated humiliation was being preserved for legal scrutiny. The recordings that followed were even more damning than I had anticipated. Angela's casual cruelty was breathtaking in its scope and creativity. During a phone conversation with her sister, Angela described me as, like having a ghost in the basement. You know she's there, but she doesn't really matter to daily life. When discussing the guardianship timeline with Jason, Angela's excitement about accessing my assets was palpable. Once we have legal control, we can liquidate everything within 6 months, Angela said with the enthusiasm of someone planning a vacation. The savings account, the veterans' benefits, even her social security can be redirected to cover our expenses. She'll never know the difference. But the recording that sealed their fate came during a conversation about the basement conditions. Jason was complaining about the water heater repairs they'd been avoiding, and Angela's response revealed the depth of their calculated neglect. Why spend money fixing problems in a space that's temporary? Angela said. If anything, the worse conditions get down there, the more motivated she'll be to accept assisted living. And if something happens, if she slips on those wet stairs or gets sick from the dampness, well, elderly people have accidents. It would solve our problems naturally. The casual discussion of scenarios that could lead to my death was chilling enough, but what followed was worse. Jason's response showed that he wasn't just passively accepting Angela's suggestions. He was actively participating in planning that treated my life as expendable. The stairs are definitely dangerous, Jason agreed. Poor lighting, loose handrail, steep steps for someone with mobility issues. If something happened, everyone would understand it was just an unfortunate accident. Listening to my son discuss my potential death as a convenient solution to his financial problems was devastating, but it also crystallized my resolve. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about ensuring that Jason and Angela never had the opportunity to treat another elderly person with such calculated cruelty. The evidence-gathering phase lasted 3 weeks, during which I documented every aspect of their conspiracy while maintaining the facade of helpless dependency. I photographed financial documents that showed their debts and spending patterns. I recorded conversations that revealed their timeline and methods. I documented the basement conditions with the precision of a crime scene investigator. But most importantly, I discovered something that would give me ultimate leverage in the coming confrontation. The house deed wasn't just in joint ownership. It contained a specific clause that Robert had insisted upon when we'd helped Jason with a down payment. If either Jason or I died, the surviving party would inherit full ownership of the property. Jason and Angela had been planning to use guardianship proceedings to access my assets, but they'd forgotten that my death would actually give me complete control of the house they'd been treating as their own. Their financial planning had a fatal flaw that would soon become their downfall. Armed with 3 weeks of evidence, a team of legal professionals, and the kind of righteous anger that comes from being systematically betrayed by the people who should have protected me, I was ready to make my move. But I wanted one final confirmation of their intentions, one last recording that would remove any possibility of sympathy or mercy in what was to come. The opportunity came when Angela received a call from the guardianship attorney they'd been consulting. I was in the basement, my recording device active, when Angela's voice carried clearly through the heating vent. "Yes, we're ready to file the guardianship petition," Angela said with barely contained excitement. "We have documented incidents of confusion, evidence of poor judgment, and testimony from family members about her declining condition. The basement living situation actually works in our favor. It shows we've been trying to care for her despite the difficulties. And the financial projections. The attorney's voice was faint but audible. Once we have control, we estimate about $300,000 in liquidated assets, plus monthly income streams that will more than cover the assisted living costs. After expenses, we're looking at clearing our mortgage and having significant investment capital. $300,000. They had calculated the exact value of my life savings and benefits, reducing 30 years of careful financial planning to a number on their spreadsheet. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They had already spent it in their minds, already decided how my lifetime of work would fund their comfort. But the conversation that followed revealed something even more sinister. The attorney was apparently concerned about potential challenges to the guardianship proceedings, and Angela's response showed just how thoroughly they had planned to discredit any opposition. If she tries to fight the guardianship, we have documentation of her confusion and several witnesses who can testify about her declining condition, Angela said. Her sister Linda might be a problem, but she lives in California and rarely visits. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the legal proceedings will be complete. They had planned not just my financial exploitation, but my legal isolation. They had identified potential supporters and developed strategies to neutralize them. This wasn't impulsive greed. It was a comprehensive assault on everything that remained of my independence and dignity. That night, as I lay on the narrow bed in the basement they planned to use as evidence of my declining condition, I made my final preparations. Tomorrow, while Jason and Angela were at work, I would execute a plan that would turn their conspiracy against them with devastating precision. I had learned their timeline, documented their methods, and recorded their conversations. I had assembled a legal team, gathered evidence, and identified their vulnerabilities. Most importantly, I had remembered who I was before grief and trust had made me vulnerable to their manipulation. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman with evidence, allies, and a plan for justice that would make Jason and Angela regret every moment of cruelty they had inflicted. Have you ever had to fight back against people who underestimate your intelligence and strength? Have you ever discovered that patience and planning could be more powerful than anger and confrontation? Share your experiences in the comments, because tomorrow my counterattack begins, and these manipulators are about to learn exactly who they've been messing with. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next is going to be absolutely perfect. The kind of justice that makes you believe that sometimes the good guys really do win. At exactly 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning, while Jason was at his insurance office and Angela was showing houses to unsuspecting clients, I climbed those basement stairs for what would be the final time. But I wasn't the same broken, grieving widow who had descended into that concrete prison 3 months earlier. I was a woman armed with evidence, backed by legal professionals, and driven by the kind of righteous fury that comes from being systematically betrayed by the people who should have protected me. In my hands, I carried a manila folder, not the one containing Jason and Angela's conspiracy plans, but my own meticulously organized documentation of their crimes. 3 weeks of recordings, photographs, financial evidence, and legal documentation that would destroy their carefully constructed narrative and expose them for the calculating predators they really were. The first call went to Linda Martinez, my attorney, who had been waiting for this moment with barely contained anticipation. "It's time," I said simply. "Execute the plan." Within 30 minutes, my kitchen table, the same table where Angela had dismissed me to the basement with such calculated cruelty, was covered with legal documents that would change everything. Protective orders preventing any attempts at guardianship proceedings. Financial account freezes that would block access to my assets. Formal elder abuse complaints that would trigger criminal investigations. And most devastatingly, eviction notices for Jason and Angela based on my 50% ownership of the property and their violation of elder abuse statutes. But the documents were just the beginning. At 9:30 a.m., the doorbell rang, and I opened it to reveal the cavalry I had assembled. Linda Martinez with a briefcase full of legal ammunition, Detective Rodriguez with recording equipment to document the confrontation, a court officer to serve papers, and a representative from Adult Protective Services to assess the basement conditions that had been my prison. Mrs. Johnson, Linda said formally, establishing the legal record. We're here to execute the protective orders and facilitate your transition to safe housing. The next 3 hours moved with the precision of a military operation. My belongings came up from the basement for the final time, loaded into a moving truck that would transport them to my new apartment at Sunset Manor Senior Community, a dignified independent living facility where I would be treated as a valued resident rather than a basement-dwelling burden. Detective Rodriguez photographed every aspect of the basement conditions while the APS representative documented violations that would support criminal charges. The water damage, inadequate heating, safety hazards, and general unsuitability for human habitation were all preserved for legal proceedings. What Jason and Angela had dismissed as quite suitable was now evidence of criminal neglect. But the most satisfying moment came when the court officer placed formal legal notifications throughout the house, ensuring that Jason and Angela would understand exactly what was happening the moment they walked through the door. The papers explained not just the immediate legal situation, but the broader criminal investigation that was about to engulf their lives. By noon, I was standing in my new apartment, bright, spacious, properly heated, with mountain views and my dignity intact. My phone rang at 12:47 p.m., and I smiled as I recognized the number. Jason, calling from his office, panic evident in his voice. "Mom, what the hell is going on? There are legal papers all over the kitchen table, and your stuff is gone. You can't just disappear like this." My response was calm, measured, and devastating. "I didn't disappear, Jason. I relocated to housing that meets basic human dignity standards." The papers on the table explain the legal situation in detail. I suggest you read them carefully and contact an attorney immediately. This is insane. You're confused. You don't understand what you're signing. We were trying to help you. I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice carrying the authority of 30 years in education and 3 weeks of meticulous evidence gathering. I understand that you put your grieving mother in a basement while planning to steal her assets. I understand that you discussed my potential death as a convenient solution to your financial problems. And I understand that you forgot I spent 3 decades teaching young people to analyze evidence, document facts, and never accept explanations that contradict observable reality. The silence that followed was so complete that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jason's voice returned, smaller somehow, desperate. "What are you talking about? What evidence?" "The recordings, Jason. I have recordings of everything. Every conversation about guardianship proceedings you planned without my knowledge. Every discussion of my assets as if they were already yours to manage. Every casual mention of basement stairs as potential accident scenarios. Every calculation of how much money my death would save you. You recorded us? That's illegal." "Actually, it's not. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and since I was present for every conversation, the recordings are perfectly admissible in court. Your attorney will explain the legal ramifications, but I can summarize. You're in serious trouble." The sound of papers rustling came through the phone as Jason apparently began reading the legal documents for the first time. His sharp intake of breath told me he was beginning to understand the scope of what was unfolding. Elder abuse charges. Financial exploitation. Conspiracy to commit fraud. "Mom, you can't be serious about this." "I'm deadly serious. You treated me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. You planned to institutionalize me so you could legally steal everything I worked for over 40 years. You discussed scenarios where my death would be financially beneficial. Yes, Jason, I'm serious about ensuring you face consequences for those choices. But we're family. You can't destroy your own son over a misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding triggered something cold and final in my voice. A misunderstanding is forgetting to return a phone call or mixing up appointment times. Systematically planning to steal someone's assets while discussing their death as a convenient solution is not a misunderstanding. It's criminal conspiracy. And family is about love, respect, and protection. What you did was the opposite of family. Wait, there's something here about the house. It says you own half the property. That can't be right. Oh, but it is right. When your father died, his ownership share transferred to me automatically. You've been treating me like a charity case in my own house. But here's the interesting part. If anything had happened to me, as you and Angela were discussing, I would have inherited your half as well. Your entire financial plan was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of property law. The silence stretched longer this time, and when Jason spoke again, his voice carried the first hint of real understanding about what he had lost. You're really doing this. You're really going to destroy our lives over this. I didn't destroy your lives, Jason. I documented the choices you made. You destroyed your own lives the moment you decided that your mother's dignity was less important than your financial convenience. I'm simply ensuring that those choices have appropriate consequences. But the real reckoning came when Angela returned home. Her call to me came at 3:15 p.m., and unlike Jason's panicked confusion, Angela's voice carried pure rage. You vindictive old bitch. How dare you do this to us? We took you in when you had nowhere else to go, and this is how you repay our kindness. My response was ice cold. Your kindness. Angela, I have recordings of you discussing my death as a financial opportunity. I have documentation of you planning to steal my assets while keeping me imprisoned in a basement. If that's your definition of kindness, then yes, I'm repaying it exactly as it deserves. Those recordings won't hold up in court. We'll fight this. We'll prove you're mentally incompetent and having some kind of breakdown. Feel free to try. I have 3 weeks of systematic documentation, testimony from multiple legal professionals about my competency, and evidence of your conspiracy that would convince any jury. But more importantly, Angela, I have something you clearly forgot about. What's that? I have 50% ownership of the house you're standing in. And as of today, you're served with eviction proceedings. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The scream that followed was audible even through the phone, a sound of pure rage and disbelief that told me everything I needed to know about Angela's true character. When the screaming stopped, Angela's voice returned with barely controlled venom. You can't evict us from our own house. I can, and I have. Check the property deed, Angela. Check the legal documents. Check with your attorney if you can afford one after the criminal charges are filed. This was never just your house, and after the way you've treated me, it's never going to be your house again. This is insane. Where are we supposed to go? I understand basements can be quite suitable, I replied with devastating calm. Or wherever you end up. The line went dead, but my phone continued ringing throughout the afternoon. Jason calling back with desperate attempts at negotiation. Angela screaming threats and accusations. Even calls from extended family members who had apparently been contacted to intervene on Jason and Angela's behalf. To each caller, my response was consistent and final. I had been systematically abused by people who should have protected me. I had documented evidence of criminal behavior, and I would not be manipulated into accepting anything less than full justice and accountability. But the most important call came that evening from Detective Rodriguez, who had spent the day reviewing the evidence and coordinating with the district attorney's office. Mrs. Johnson, I wanted to update you on the criminal investigation. Based on the evidence you provided, we're filing charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted guardianship fraud. The district attorney is also considering charges related to the dangerous living conditions and the recorded discussions about potential accidents. What does that mean for Jason and Angela? If convicted on all charges, they're looking at significant prison time. Jason could face 5 to 10 years. Angela potentially longer since she appears to have been the primary architect of the conspiracy. But more importantly, this case is going to help us identify and prosecute similar situations. Your courage in documenting this abuse is going to protect other elderly people from facing what you endured. 6 months later, I stood in my bright, comfortable apartment, reading the newspaper coverage of Jason and Angela's plea bargain. They had agreed to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for 3 years in prison, full restitution of financial damages, and permanent restraining orders preventing contact with me. The house had been sold, with my half of the proceeds funding my independent living for the foreseeable future. Jason and Angela's half had been seized to cover restitution and legal fees, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their choices. But for me, the real victory wasn't legal or financial. It was personal. I had reclaimed not just my assets and my dignity, but my sense of self-worth and my faith in my own judgment. The woman who had been reduced to basement living by people who claimed to love her had emerged as an advocate, a survivor, and an inspiration. The Dignity in Aging Resource Center that I opened with a portion of my settlement funds had helped over 50 elderly individuals navigate similar family conflicts in its first year of operation. Each success story validated my decision to fight back rather than accept abuse as an inevitable part of aging. Most importantly, I had learned that growing older doesn't mean growing smaller, that needing help doesn't mean surrendering autonomy, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth as a human being. On my 60th birthday, exactly 1 year after my liberation from the basement, I received an unexpected visitor. My granddaughter Sophia, now 16 and preparing for college, had driven over with a homemade cake and a heartfelt apology. "Grandma, I'm sorry I didn't speak up when they put you in the basement. I was just a kid and didn't understand what was really happening. But I want you to know that what you did, standing up for yourself, fighting back, protecting other people, it changed how I think about strength and courage." As we sat together in my beautiful apartment, sharing cake and talking about Sophia's college plans, I realized that my story had come full circle. I had lost a son and daughter-in-law to their own greed and cruelty, but I had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and the satisfaction of knowing that my fight had protected others from similar abuse. The basement that had been meant to break my spirit had instead forged me into an advocate. The conspiracy that had been designed to steal my dignity had instead revealed my incredible resilience. And the family that had tried to reduce me to a burden had instead discovered that they had underestimated one of the strongest women they would ever encounter. I had gone from basement prisoner to the architect of my own justice. And in a world where elder abuse often goes unnoticed and unpunished, my story stood as proof that sometimes, with courage, evidence, and the right allies, it really is possible to fight back and win. But perhaps my most important lesson isn't about revenge or legal victories. It's about something far more fundamental. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and genuine care. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you're born with. Jason and Angela were connected to me by genetics and marriage, but they failed every test of what family actually means. Meanwhile, Sophia, Detective Rodriguez, Linda Martinez, and the community at Sunset Manor became my true family. People who saw my worth, respected my dignity, and supported my strength rather than trying to exploit my vulnerability. I discovered that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that the people who truly care about you will never ask you to make yourself smaller for their convenience. Real family lifts you up when you're down, protects you when you're vulnerable, and celebrates your victories rather than calculating how to profit from your struggles. My story reminds us that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand the respect you deserve, and to build new chapters that honor your worth rather than diminish it. It doesn't make you disposable. Needing help doesn't make you powerless. And accepting kindness doesn't mean accepting abuse disguised as care. Keep choosing yourself. Keep building new chapters. Keep proving that it's never too late to start over. Like me, you have more strength than you realize, more allies than you know, and more power than anyone who tries to diminish you could ever imagine. The desert is full of plants that bloom after the harshest conditions. Be like the desert. Bloom anyway. What story should I tell next? Drop your suggestions below. Workplace revenge, neighbor justice, friendship betrayals. I want to hear about the times when people who thought they had all the power got exactly what they deserved. Because these stories matter. They remind us that justice is possible, that courage can triumph over cruelty, and that sometimes the most satisfying endings come from the most unexpected places. See you in the next story.